we're transitioning into a plenary exploring the science behind human-animal connection. This session aims to provide our diverse audience, spanning both animal welfare and human services sectors, with foundational 101 content on human-animal bond studies. Initially, we considered separate tracks focusing on human-animal bond 101 for our human services audience, and then homeless services 101 for our animal welfare audience. Instead, we've consolidated our audience on this one track to ensure all attendees benefit from this essential information. For our animal welfare audience members who feel that they are already familiar with these concepts, we urge you to stay engaged because our plenary speaker will also help us recognize and challenge our biases on what our relationships with animals should look like. We'll uncover that the human-animal bond transcends traditional stereotypes, highlighting the importance of embracing its diverse manifestations and refraining from hasty judgments. Through this plenary, we hope to foster a deeper appreciation and understanding of the rich complexities within the human-animal relationship. And there's no one better to speak on this topic than Dr. Jyothi Robertson. Dr. Jyothi Robertson stands as an esteemed veterinarian, celebrated for her multifaceted and illustrious career that spans over 2 decades within the realm of animal care. And she is widely recognized as a visionary thought leader on a global scale. Dr. Robertson's journey commenced with the acquisition of her Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree, which led her to private practice and then a municipal shelter, followed by an extensive 3-year residency at UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine, where she achieved board specialization in shelter medicine. Dr. Robertson went on to establish JVR Shelter Strategies in 2011. Through this venture, she provides consultative services to animal welfare and related organizations, both nationally and internationally. In 2015, Dr. Robertson sowed the seeds of her passion project, The Journey You Own, with a mission to illuminate the interconnected nature of our work and the vital role of grounding practices in bolstering emotional and mental well-being. This endeavor has since blossomed into a fiscally sponsored nonprofit dedicated to empowering individuals in the animal sector and beyond, arming them with tools and resources that foster productivity, alignment, and connection. Dr. Robertson's commitment to making a positive impact is unwavering as she continues to volunteer her veterinary services to unsheltered populations and under-resourced communities. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Robertson. We are very eager to hear from you. And with that, I will hand things over to you.
Yeah. Hi, Christine. Thank you. It's exciting to be here. This is a new way of doing it because I have my phone and I can see myself on Ruba right here. And so it's kind of exciting to have, I'll try not to get too distracted by that. Let me go ahead and share my screen and get myself into full screen mode here. I'm going to close myself out so I can't see anyone now. If anyone has a question or anything, I'm sort of in the chat as well, but it'll be a little bit challenging. So as Christine said, she contacted me about a month and a half ago, I think it is now, and asked me to talk about the human-animal bond specifically. This is a topic that I actually have not spent a lot of time speaking about. And so it's been a fun month and a half of doing a lot of research to see what the science is that's out there. I definitely studied it while I was in veterinary school, and then I've done my own research along the way, but I really didn't realize how much is out there. So for our purposes today, I've chosen to focus in on a few research articles that I'm going to be describing to really bring out some of the science that exists behind our human-animal connections. I'm going to be using terminology. I'll be defining it very soon, but even here, this form of stating it as human-animal or human, non-human animal really speaks to who we're being when we're with others. And the other can be a dog, it can be a cat, it can be a bird, it could be another human. But it's this connection that happens. And there's something that happens physically in our bodies when we connect with another being. You know, I just was listening to Priya Parker too, who I thought was fantastic. And her description of gathering and this art of gathering, just coming together in a way that opens up our minds. Well, that's part of this connection, right? That's part of the science. That's part of the science that I'm going to explore with us. But underlying this is shared journeys as well. Similar to, I have to say, this particular dog is Rosebud, and it's a photo that was taken by Mary Shannon Johnstone, who graciously shared all her photos with me. She lives in North Carolina and was taking photos of dogs at a particular shelter that I was working with. And Rosebud, when I saw Rosebud's photo and when I've met Rosebud, it just reminded me of Princess. So that's why I pulled that photo in, because that journey that we just heard about with Anita and Princess is a journey that I am thinking that many of us have experienced. Right? We have so many different relationships. One of the reasons, especially those of us who are in the animal well-being space, are here is because of our relationship with another being, whether it's a bird or a tortoise or a dog or a cat. And so I invite you now, like while I'm talking and while I'm sharing my intention, to actually go into the chat, because I want to make this a little bit interactive. You're going to see me writing on the screen and so on. Go into the chat and let me know, and let each other know, like, who is your princess? Who is that? If you could pick like one, and I know there's so many in our lives, but if there's one that just comes to mind, one being, whether, again, dog, cat, hamster, tortoise, whatever it is, pick that being and put their name into the chat. And one interesting thing, one thing that just connects you with that being, if you feel like sharing with others. Again, it's a great way for us to create some community here while we're listening. So my intention for you today is to create a shared understanding of the impact of the human, non-human relationship on our physical, mental, and social well-being. So some of us may have a lot of science and understanding of the human-animal bond. We may be researchers. I might even be presenting a study that you did. And yet I invite you as the listener to come newly to this. Reflect on how the bond shows up in your life, okay? Either in the relationships that you have or the relationships that you're viewing or those that you're supporting through your work. And then my invitation to you is to newly engage in strengthening this connection for all beings. So the science is there, but what underlies the science is this relationship and what we do with it, what we do with the knowledge of the impact of the relationship on ourselves and all beings. This is another photo of Rosebud, and I love how she's super playful and always goes into this play bow. And when I was thinking about how to start this presentation, I was trying to find out, like, how long have we had this relationship where when I show up, Rosebud or whomever is going to go into a play bow and want to interact with me because they're my friend. That's my best friend that I'm seeing and that we're now going to be engaging together. And so I pulled up this diagram, and I'm going to already preface it by saying, whether you believe in domestication of animals or not, this is one diagram that showed up, which presents one particular view of the human-animal bond. And yet what I find most interesting is right here, hopefully you can see. Christine, could you unmute yourself and tell me if you're able to see my pen? Because I can't see you.
Yes, I can see your pen.
Fantastic. Okay, that means it's working. Thank you. So right here, about 30,000 years ago, like more than that even, right? Between 13,000 and 34,000 years before the Common Era, supposedly humans domesticated dogs. which really to me means that there was this relationship that showed up in our historical records that was some form of connection that continued then, and a form of connection that continued for thousands of years before the next animal was actually domesticated in 9,000 BCE. And I didn't realize cats were domesticated later and horses only about 5,000 years ago. So there was a long period of time where people and dogs were connecting in different ways. And then people and other animals, thousands of years of this connection, of also, give me a second here while I work through my slide. It's the fun of of playing and writing on slides, is also getting rid of the writing. It's there's been thousands of years of these relationships, and each of those relationships is a story. Right? There's some story that's behind that, some sort of connection. And so for me, because I asked you to please tell me the names of some of your animals, and I see, let's see, Maui and AJ and Kai and Blue, and I'm really happy to see that people are writing into the chat and Huva, because I can multitask at the same time. And so there's many others. Mine is this dog, Sam, on the left. Now, Sam and Jack, I had at the same time, and both of them meant so much to me. So Jack was this black lab pitty mix. And Sam, well, Sam is Sam. Sam, I named Sam Admiral Samuel D. Bumpernickel IV. I don't know why, but all my animals ended up with the last name of Bumpernickel. So I'm on Bumpernickel the 26th or something right now. Probably more if every single one of my fish and pet shrimp have had Bumpernickel names. But Admiral Samuel D. Bumpernickel IV, whom I lovingly called Sam, was really the first dog that I owned by myself. My parents had a dog, in my childhood, but Sam, I got when I was teaching third grade out in New Jersey. And I took Sam with me from New Jersey to California. And I started vet tech school at a community college right here in the Bay Area that some of you who are here know, Foothill College. And Sam was the one that I learned on, meaning I would come home and try to figure out if I could hear his heart beating or not, or look into his ear, or do all the vet related things that I was doing. And he was with me through vet school, and he was with me through the birth of my first child as well. And you'll hear more about Sam as we continue with this story. Sam was big, as you see in this photo. Like, there I am. You can kind of see Jack's head in the corner. And Sam was definitely a big boy. So let me start by defining the human-animal connection. Human-animal connection represents a shared journey between humans and non-human animals. And I think the terminology is important. I think that really a lot of the research describes it as human-animal bond, where the bond is a positive thing. And that's actually when Christine approached me. She asked me to speak about the human-animal bond. I prefer the word connection. I also prefer human, non-human connection, because technically, at least in my culture and some other cultures I know, we view the human-animal relationship as being a relationship that has one that's subservient to the other. So when we talk about the bond and connection, we want to see them as equal. And so there's many different ways of framing it. I am going to use these words interchangeably throughout the course of this next 30, 40 minutes or so. And I'm going to use it interchangeably based on what the researchers are using the terms as. And the same happens for when I speak about the beings in my life, my dog, Sam, and others. If the study uses the word pet, I will use the word pet. If the study uses the word dog, I'll use the word dog. And so I'm using the terminology that's showing up in that particular research. And the way that I'm going to define human-animal bond today will be the definition that I'm drawing from the American Veterinary Medical Association. There's many different definitions. Let me tell you, when I was doing the research, I was surprised to see how many different definitions there are out there. But I'm choosing to use this one because I'm a veterinarian, and this is what I studied when I was in vet school. and because a lot of the research that I'm pulling from involves the AVMA in some way. So their definition of human-animal bond is a mutually beneficial and dynamic relationship between people and animals that's influenced by behaviors considered essential to the health and well-being of both. The bond is beneficial to the mental, physical, and social health of people and animals. What I want to highlight here is mutually beneficial and that it's dynamic. So what that means is it's not just me thinking that I'm getting something out of this animal, like this relationship, that there's something that's also being observed and that can be measured. And that's where the science comes in, measured from the place of the animal as well, the non-human animal. And that the relationship is dynamic because it's constantly shifting. As we know, like our relationship with our friends, with the people in our lives, the non-human animals in our lives, with our dogs, cats, everything, it changes on a day-to-day basis based on our moods, based on what's happening in our lives. And so recognizing that it's very dynamic and that it is beneficial to mental, physical, and social health. And so I'm choosing these three buckets. There's a lot more. There's psychological, physiological, emotional, there's quality of life and so on. But I've grouped them into these three, again, because the research I can group into these three as I speak with all of you. And so let me start with mental health. And really what I'm thinking about here is what's happening inside of the brain when we're experiencing this connection. Like what's actually going on in there? And what studies are there to show that? Well, there are many, let me say, first of all, and a lot of them look at these particular hormones and chemicals, okay, the ones that I'm circling right here: cortisol, phenylethylamine, dopamine, endorphin, oxytocin, prolactin, and cortisol, right? So many studies on these, but there's one particular paper that I'm going to draw on right now. And it's a relatively small study, but I liked it and it was easy to explain. So I'm going to choose that one now. There were 18 adults in this study. So 18 men and women who were selected. And these 18 people love dogs. They have dogs of their own. They were selected for a study where they would spend 10, 15, 20 minutes with a dog. Prior to spending time with the dog, they'd have their blood pressure measured and then their blood drawn. Their blood would then be tested for each of these neurochemicals. Now, meanwhile, there's a group of dogs, 18 dogs. These dogs don't necessarily belong to the individuals. They're male and female, spayed, unspayed, neutered, unneutered. It's kind of a combination. And they too had their blood pressure measured beforehand. And they too had their blood drawn. And then they were put into this social setting. And then the same was repeated. So they also had their neurochemicals measured and their blood pressure measured again. Okay. Give me a second here. I'm going to erase all this ink. So, one more second while I get rid of my pen. So the first result that showed up is that phenylethylamine was increased. Well, what is this? Phenylethylamine, it's a hormone that's found and called the chemical of love because it shows up when we get really excited when we're about to see someone we love. Okay, so like those jittery feelings that maybe we get in our chest, or if our palms get a little bit sweaty, it's considered the chemical of love. Often we'll see it written as, let's see if I can write, PEA. So you can look it up as PEA as well. And PEA has been shown in studies with things like chocolate. It increases when you have chocolate. So when people are given chocolate candy at Valentine's Day, it's perhaps to increase the PEA. And it increased after these people were petting dogs. And in other studies as well, it was shown to increase. When people were with their cats, it was increased. When people were with their dogs, it was increased. And it was increased in both. in both the dog and the human. And so it was this chemical of love shows up when being petted. And that's, I thought, was really neat. As a side note, when I was looking these studies up, it turns out that the food source that has one of the highest PEAs is actually sauerkraut. And it has a much higher PEA than even chocolate. So technically you should be giving sauerkraut to somebody who you are wooing, not chocolate. But, just a side note. I've never heard of sauerkraut as being that sort of chemical. The next neurochemical that was increased in this study is dopamine. Now, dopamine, many of us know as impacting our reward center, right? It gives us energy. So when we do something, and if it's something of benefit to ourselves, we might do it again and again and again because dopamine is now flooding our system. So all these hormones are coming, from the pituitary glands and from parts of the brain, and they actually come into our bloodstream and start flooding our system and then have us acting in certain ways. In this study with the 18 dogs and the 18 individuals, dopamine was increased in both the dogs and in the humans. And then I have a picture of two voles here because voles have been used in many studies. And whether or not, again, that's a whole nother lecture I can give on use of animals and how I feel about that. But because of my purpose of showing science today, I'm going to share this study with you. And voles have a wonderful bonding relationship with one other individual vole or two other individual voles where they form these mating behaviors. And so there's many studies that are done on voles. And one of the studies has this pair of voles. I'll show you, I think the easiest way that I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to draw it out for you. Because again, I like drawing. And so there is a vole, and this vole was sitting on one side. Oh my goodness. Okay, when I practiced this, I practiced it. I practiced it with my pen, but now I'm using my touch screen. So it's not the best image of a vole, but just, imagine that is the vole that I have. So we have a vole, and in between this vole and its partner is this huge wall that was built. Okay. And the wall does have a door in one little section. And on the other side of, let me get my color of this wall, is the other vole's partner. Okay, and this vole is a little bit sad because it can't be with its partner right now. It's on the other side of this fence. And so what this first vole does in this study, repeatedly, numerous studies showing this, is if there's a lever, so in one of the tests, there's this little lever that the vole can push, and that opens the door. So if it can push the lever, it's going to go do that right away and get to the other side. But let's say that the lever isn't there. What this vole will do is it'll actually scale this entire wall and end up coming to the other side and then end up snuggling with its partner, which was really cool because now they both are happy. And all along the way in these studies, now remember, there's numerous studies that are showing this, these voles have tiny little they're like fiber optic sensors that are inside of their brains that lights up and that show which part of the brain is lighting up. And so what happens, as I get out of this slide, is these two voles that you see here have a certain part of their brain that's lighting up. That part of the brain, okay, I'm going to do a really bad job pronouncing this because I'm not great with my anatomy, but it's a nucleus accumbens. And it's the part of the brain that lights up when dopamine is being released. And when they ended up together, it gets released even more. So it's getting released while they recognize that their partner is on the other side of this fence, but it gets released a ton in both of them. So they're like lighting up all over the place when they're together and when they're bonded. So dopamine, again, is flooding the system and is having like both of them in all these different scenarios having this positive response, which then makes them want to have more positive response. And again, the same exact type of neurophysiology was happening in people that were petting dogs. Dopamine was flooding their brain, it's flooding the dog's brain, and then they want more, right? So like I know with my dog, if I'm petting her, that she'll roll over and then she'll ask me to pet her some more, and then I'll want to pet her some more. And so this is like this continual chain that's happening. Okay, the next neurochemical that shows up is endorphins. And endorphins, when I think of endorphins, I think of the runner's high, right? Like when people are running and you hear about streakers, like runners that run every single day of the year without fail, and they keep running. And one of the reasons they keep running and they have this runner's high is because endorphins are being released in their brain. And these endorphins reduce stress. What's interesting is they maintain this baseline homeostasis, which allows for pain management and behavioral stability. Right? So you don't feel pain as much. The more you're running, the better you feel. And as your body, throughout your body, gets sort of flooded with these endorphins, you feel this extra energy. And then you keep running. And that happens when you pet a dog, or you communicate with a cat, or you're with your bird, or you're with your tortoise. When you're in that human-animal connection, that human-animal bond, these endorphins are again flooding your system. And so you get this whole feeling of this runner's high. And guess what? Your dog is getting it too. So they also are feeling more stable. They also are having a reduction in their bodily stress and a reduction in those feelings of pain. The next neurochemical in this study, which again, now oxytocin has been studied a lot. The next chemical is oxytocin. So I pulled up oxytocin and it was, hundreds and hundreds of papers that were just coming up. And so I just tried to summarize here. Basically, oxytocin makes you feel happy. Right? It gives you feelings of empathy and can actually impact our social behaviors, which I think is really interesting to think about, that there's something that's getting released in my body as a chemical from the pituitary, from my other glands, from the entire neuroendocrine system, that actually makes me more empathetic to other beings, to the situations and the concerns that they have. And that's pretty amazing, that when we touch our dogs and when they touch us, that they also have empathy, that it leads to a positive social behavior for both of us. Oxytocin is also considered a love hormone because it's increased in childbirth. So that's the hormone that relaxes the muscles of uterus during childbirth, promotes positive feelings, increases feelings of trust as well. This is one of my sons, Flint, with Rufus. And I know that Rufus was a therapy dog. And whenever anyone would hold or hug Rufus, it just, smiles, right? Like what Flint has, because there was this increased feeling of trust. And now when I hear about oxytocin and I think about the hormones and the chemicals that are coming into my body, well, that makes a lot of sense, that when I'm with Rufus, I feel calmer. It makes me feel happy. Prolactin is another one of those hormones that we hear about for breastfeeding and for nurturing, for milk letdown. It supports nurturing feelings. It's also a neuroprotective agent, which is interesting. It protects our brain. It actually protects our brain and modulates and manages our stress responses. So these dogs who were in these tests with people, when they were being petted, they felt and noticed and had that nurturing feeling in themselves, and they had a release of prolactin. Right? So their own brains are now being protected. And this is Katara. Katara is the great great, oh, I don't know how many greats, a whole bunch of greats, niece of Sam, who I showed you in the beginning. Guitar's now with me, actually physically with me. And she's my dog. And I know that I feel very motherly towards her. So I'm pretty sure that when I think of her, my brain's probably flooding with oxytocin, prolactin, some of these other neurochemicals. Now, the one chemical that was actually reduced was cortisol. And cortisol is a stress chemical, and it goes down in so many studies with animals, showing that both people and animals are becoming more relaxed when they're in this relationship. By the way, this study with the 18 individuals and the dogs, this was the one thing that was not reduced in the dogs. And what the researchers hypothesized is that because the dogs were coming into a new room, so the room, which I didn't describe, it was an empty room. It had 2 chairs where there was a veterinary physiologist and then a nurse practitioner psychologist who was there, and then the individual who was sitting on a blanket on the ground. And so these dogs were not familiar with the individual, so some of them did experience stress, so they had an increase in cortisol. All the humans had reduced cortisol. But there are many other studies, and I want to talk about one which Drs. Pendry and Vandergriff did. They have written many studies about cortisol and pet therapy dogs and the human-animal interaction. And in one of their studies, they took 249 college students and they broke them up into 4 groups. Group number 1 was a group that could spend 10 minutes petting dogs or cats. And so they got to spend time, multiple days over the course of this quarter. And prior to spending time with these dogs and cats, they had their cortisol salivary, so from their saliva, salivary cortisol tested before, during, and after, as did the dogs and cats. And then that's one part. There's a second group then of students who are allowed to watch. So they're physically standing there and they're not allowed to pet the animals, but they can watch this interaction. And then there was a third group that could watch it on a screen. So they're nowhere in the same vicinity. They're just watching these images of people with cats and dogs. And then the fourth group has no interaction with animals whatsoever. They don't have pets. They're not seeing images, none of that. And what this study showed, and actually other studies similar to it, is that those that were petting the cats and dogs had the lowest cortisol levels over time, significantly lower. And that by having pets in these environments with people, that their cortisol, their whole stress will reduce significantly. In my own work that I've done, I've noticed the same thing, and I've heard about it in different relationships. Heather Kamisa and I, through ADISA, did a study probably 2 or 3 years ago with Meals on Wheels America that was funded by PetSmart Charities. And we were exploring the human-animal connection in Meals on Wheels America clients. The entire study was pretty long, but there was one component of the study that involved a bonded family scale that came out of the University of Tennessee, Professor Nugent. And he created this scale to measure attachment to pets specifically. So we gave this scale to 400 individuals. So 400 Meals on Wheels America clients, right? So you can see that right here. And what you see here is that all these numbers are really, really high, right? 94%, 98%. Oops, sorry. And what are they agreeing to? Well, they're agreeing that pets bring happiness to their lives, that they would feel lost without their pet, that the pet in their family makes them feel happier, that the pet comforts them when they have bad feelings, that they feel that their pet loves them, and that they feel emotionally close to their pets, right? So this relationship, why did it even come up? And like, why are we even doing this study? Well, the study is an interesting study because it was created and really formulated because Meals on Wheels partners were seeing that the individuals who were receiving meals were forgoing their own meal or giving their meal to their pet. So Meals on Wheels America said, wait a minute, like our role is to really support these individuals with these meals, among other things. And now they're giving their meals to their pets. We want to understand what this really has, what's happening. Like, why is this? What's underlying this feeling? And so that is just how the study came about. And I think it's really interesting to see that similar studies have been done in other populations. This particular study was just done. If you see right here, February 6th, 2024, it was the American Psychiatric Association and the American Veterinary Medical Association. What they did is they did this monthly survey of 2,200 individuals. Now, I don't know who these people are. I actually don't have a whole lot of information about them, but I can say that right here from the numbers, 62% had a really calm presence by having a pet. 62% said that it reduced stress. I'm a little surprised by these numbers at the bottom that only 19% said that it increased social connections with others, and 29% said it added structure to the schedules. So a part of me wonders who the population was, because that can make a tremendous difference, right? Because when you compare these numbers with the Meals on Wheels America numbers, you can see how different the attachment scores were in this particular study. Now, I want to get to the physical health. I'm looking at my time and realizing that I'm taking a little bit, probably too long of time. So let me get on to the physical health. With physical health, most of the studies that are out there have centered on these three areas: the lowering of blood pressure, so the cardiovascular and circulatory systems, the decreased risk of heart disease, and then the immune system, with specifically looking at prevention of allergies in children and how children have been healthier because they're exposed to animals in their home. So they're less likely to get colds, let's say. So we're looking at immune system, endocrine system, lower blood pressure, which is the circulatory system, and the cardiovascular system. And in all these situations, there's been tremendous benefits. The American Heart Association has done a lot of research around this specifically, and these are quotes directly from them. What they've said is that dog owners were 65% less likely to die after a heart attack than non-dog owners. They show that dog owners generally had a 24% reduced risk of mortality, and that owning a cat makes you more likely to be alive 1 year after a heart attack. And here I have a photo of me and Sam, because for me, this data has really spoken true. Back in 2005, when Sam and I were, at that point, I was a veterinarian. He was in my life. He was an adult dog at that time. And I was pregnant with my first child. And at that time, I was getting one of those ultrasounds that you get for the baby. And the person who was doing the ultrasound said, wait a minute, something doesn't look right in here. And they said, go to a full ultrasonographer. And what I found out is that all my organs are flipped. So they're reversed. So it's situs inversus totalis. But then they also did an echo of my heart at that time. And what we found out is that my right heart, so the right side of my heart, is doing what the left side's supposed to do. And the left side is doing what the right side's supposed to do. So basically my aorta and vena cava are switched. So that's called transposition of the greater arteries. And that all my valves are reversed as well. And that my heart is actually a little bit deformed. This is, I guess, malformed. I don't know. It's a little different. How about that? It's a little different. And so at that time, I went to Stanford, right? Pregnant with my first child, and people are telling me that my heart's a little weird and that all my organs are reversed. And the doctors there said that my life expectancy was 40. Now, I'm older than 40 now. And so let me just tell you, I no longer go to those particular doctors. I now go to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And what they have attributed, not only to myself, but others, is actually this relationship with animals, is the work that I do, and that in itself improves my heart health. So my relationship with Sam at that time was what decreased my cortisol, increased oxytocin, prolactin, that improved my exercise because now I'm going outside and exercising with him, and gave me a sense of purpose. Right. And I'm sure many of you have similar stories. And I know that there's going to be so many stories that'll be shared throughout. If you do have a story that you want to share, this would be a great time to go ahead and put it in the chat, because I would love to know about some other stories like this, where suddenly like you're told something and you realize that this relationship is really what's holding you through. And so that is my heart related story. I'm taking a look at the time. There's also a lot related to longevity. There's a study of more than 3 million dog owners who lived alone in Sweden that showed that they had a 36% chance of living longer than people who didn't have dogs. And so this again speaks to some of the research that Heather and I collected from Meals on Wheels America, showing that there was increased social interaction, reduced loneliness, right? Because you have that connection. There's more likelihood to exercise because you're taking your pet outside. And when exercising, conversations are going to happen, right? Like, oh, wow, I have a dog that looks like that. Or now you're going to go to the dog park and have a relationship and conversation with people at the park. Or maybe you're physically going outside and talking about your cats, or my neighbor who carries her bird on her shoulder, which brings up conversations all the time. Those are all improvements in our social well-being, right? That impact who we're being and how we view our own lives. And what these studies show is it actually improves the well-being of our pets as well, of our family members, of our non-human family members. Habri has done a lot of different studies on social health in children. I encourage you to go take a look. Human Animal Bond Research Institute. They've done research in adults as well, but this is just some of the research that I think is somewhat interesting to see that, you know, when kids experience trauma, attachments to pets, it can promote healthy social development. And that's something that I encourage all of us to think about. Now, I want to close this out, though, with another side of this bond. And this is the side that looks at our view of the bond when we view it from within different interactions and adversities. There's a particular study that was written by Jennifer Applebaum and others in 2021. It's actually a paper that she wrote with her team on, it's called Love, Fear, and the Human-Animal Bond, on adversity and multi-species relationships. And what she looked at was these six areas: housing discrimination, intimate partner violence, LGBTQ+ identity-based discrimination, racism, neighborhood disadvantage, and economic inequality. And then she asked people questions and looked at the research around the human-animal bond and human-animal interactions. And this is an image that she has in her paper, which shows the complexity of these relationships. I'm going to just read, if I have a minute. Christine, do I still have a minute? I can't see the time.
Oh, yes, you have a minute. We are cutting it a little bit close, though.
Okay, so I won't read this. I'll have you take a look at this, because I'll have all of you take a look at this, because I want you to recognize that there could be this other flip side, that the human-animal bond may increase the effects of stress and well-being sometimes, that it can be challenging, and that it's really a complex situation. And when we think about the complexity, I want all of you, so all of you in this audience, to think about, what is your role in these? What are the questions that you need to ask yourself, and how you can affect and impact these relationships, whether in your own work or in other work? And the way that I think about this is through unlearning, and through asking yourself, what is it that you're willing to let go of about your own relationships with animals, with other humans, and then tearing that apart so that you can help support new relationships, whether it be in the housing industry, whether it be in the politics industry, in the animal welfare industry, in the medicine industry, in the veterinary medicine industry. What does it look like to kind of rip apart our assumptions? And that's what Sam did for me. And so this is the last photo I took of me and Sam before he passed away. And I know that when we think about science, there's all this research, but really what underlies science is the stories. It's really the journeys. It's the relationships that we have with others. So that is it for my slides. I'm sorry I took up this entire time, but thank you. Thank you very much. And I invite you to either place questions in the chat or message me, because I think I'm in Whova now pretty effectively. So go ahead and communicate with me. Let me know what you're taking from this.
Well, thank you, Dr. Robertson. That was an incredible presentation. I think you really laid out.
Enough.
See, well, you really laid out the science of the connection that we have with other non-human animals in a beautiful way, and brought it all back to a place that non-academics can also understand. But of course, there is a science to it as well, and that is important for us to understand. There is a question that's been in Whova for, I think, at least a couple of days now. So this person was definitely eager to ask you this, and you spoke to it beautifully at the beginning, but I want to bring it back to this question. What advice do you have for us academics that are engaging in decolonial praxis? Are there any tips you have for those of us inherently at a disadvantage due to having to use the English language? For example, and this is what you addressed at the beginning, human animal inherently asserts a hierarchy that goes against my cultural background. So any words that you have to share around language and the frame of mind that language really puts us in when we're talking about these relationships?
Yes, I mean, I think language is so important. It creates our reality and the way that we think about our reality. And so I really appreciated this question. And I started to answer it in Whova, and I hopefully answered components of it here, where I do believe that there are certain views that have us in dominance or not in these relationships. And that as we start to use new language, we can shift our very way of viewing ourselves in relation to other beings. And I think it's important that we start using that, using new language and questioning the language that we're using. Again, human animal bond has been in science, I'm putting it in quotes, for so long. Domestication as well. I spoke to that. And yet, if we don't speak about it newly, through journeys, through storytelling, through connection, then we are not offering an opportunity for changing everybody's view of relationships. So I think that's fantastic. And I think it's all of our jobs that's part of our unlearning process, to look at what are those terms that we're using that we can shift our own use of language.
That's amazing. So there are also some questions in here in the chat and in the Q&A around slides and references that were made. And I just want to remind folks that people will be able to watch back the recorded presentation in Whova. And also you can connect with Dr. Robertson through Whova to continue to chat with her and maybe grab those citations from her if she's willing to share.
Yep, I created a whole document with the citations that I just need to upload, I think, or figure out what to do. Maybe I'll share it with your team, Christine, and then you can share it out. And then my slides are available as well. Not my funky drawings, but the rest of it are available. So
Well, thank you. Thank you for being so generous with your time and with your knowledge as well. Thank you for being here, Dr. Robertson. We appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation.